to be a race car passenger. Just a guy who bugs the driver. Say, man, can I turn on the radio? You should slow down. Why we gotta keep going in circles? Man, you really like Tide.
Good morning. It's Wednesday, Apollo Wednesday, January the 7th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Varney and Company, motivation, meditation, and Apollo. All that and more when I get back. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. Now, Varney and Company.
Morning, everyone. America is going to get a lot of oil from Venezuela. On Truth Social, President Trump says 30 to 50 million barrels will be taken to the United States. It'll be sold. The money will be controlled by the president. Oil sales from Venezuela will continue indefinitely. The Energy Secretary is starting talks with oil company executives. They're discussing how to revitalize Venezuela's oil industry. Separately, the authorities in Caracas have been suppressing any dissent. That is an issue. Any Americans working on oil infrastructure there will need security protection. Now, here's the key thing. The price of oil down this morning with this extra supply coming on the market. Okay, it's down only 20 cents, but you're back to $56 a barrel. No change yet for the price of gas. Regular still at the very low average of $2.81. Looks like it could fall further. Tuesday, the Dow and the S&P closed at all-time highs. Not much change this morning. The Dow's up 74 points. No change for the S&P. Nasdaq is down 44. Bitcoin, last time I checked, it was 92. Now it's 91.9. The 10-year Treasury yields 4.14%. The 2-year below 3.5%. You're looking at 3.46 now. Gold 4,400. 4461 to be precise. It's down $35. Silver back to $79 an ounce. $76 on silver. On the show today, Secretary of State Rubio says the U.S. wants to buy Greenland. He's backpedaling on military intervention. Trump's threats to take over the island have really upset the Europeans. They've not yet bought the argument that the West's security depends on Greenland's strategic position. The Justice Department is taking a close look at New York's housing policy. C.O. Weaver has been appointed director of the Office to Protect Tenants. She has talked about impoverishing the white middle class. That's her words. She says home ownership is racist. Her word. I suggest tenants need protection from communists. And there's this. Watch. A young man proposes to his girl at a ski resort in Michigan. They drop the ring. It drops 100 feet down a grating and falls into the snow. But, hold on, have we got there yet? Oh, they haven't dropped it yet. Hold on. They're dropping it. Now they're looking for it.
Did they find it?
Wait. Look, keep it going. Okay. So, can we get to the bit where they find it, please?
Fast forward.
There's a miracle here, folks. An employee of the ski...
Well, anyway, that's Varney and Company, Nonprofit News Now. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of Bill O'Reilly.
462-9557 or visit AmericanFinancing.net/ Do you approve or disapprove of the USA having sent military forces into Venezuela to capture Maduro? Approve 40, disapprove 42, unsure 18. Political party. 74% of Republicans approve, 13% of Democrats, 34% of independents. Next question, was it appropriate for President Trump to order the operation on his own? Should he be consulted with Congress? Appropriate on his own, 37, Congress, 63. Now, that's because people don't understand. You can't do covert operations with congressional debate underway.
So you listen to that, and he's very breezy about this, and it's this very smug attitude that he's got, well, you can't do it with a congressional debate underway. And what he's suggesting here, actually, matter of fact, what he's saying is that the President of the United States has the right to conduct covert operations. No, he doesn't. Now, if Mr. O'Reilly wants the president to have the right to conduct covert operations, then perhaps he can get a constitutional amendment that says so. But until then, the president of the United States is limited. It's called limited government. That means the operations of everybody in government is limited. And the president of the United States is only authorized to do that which is explicitly permitted to him in the Constitution. That's the way it works, Mr. O'Reilly. I know you're a little bit dense on this subject, but that's your problem, not mine. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Stuart Varney's My Take.
This is a story about the rise and fall of identity politics. It is about Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. In his first term, he had to deal with the George Floyd riots. Minneapolis was damaged, but Walz delayed bringing in the National Guard. Why? He didn't want to offend George Floyd's memory or his supporters who were burning the town. He was re-elected in 2022 and promptly turned hard left, assuming a political identity that was close to socialist. By 2024, Kamala Harris was looking for a vice presidential running mate. She looked long and hard at Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. It is widely assumed that she rejected him because he's Jewish. His identity hurt his chances. She turned to Walz, and the rest is history. Now, 1 year later, identity has killed his career as governor. He's had to abandon his run for a third term. A huge fraud scandal has engulfed the state. At least $1 billion was ripped off. The vast majority of those convicted are Somalis, who have been settling in Minneapolis for many years. It was their identity which kept authorities at bay. Hold minorities accountable, and you will be called a racist. That was the flaw in the whole system. Playing the race identity card allowed fraudsters to run amok. Initially, Walz called out the people who uncovered the scandal. He complained that racism was at the heart of their investigations. No, sir. It was the other way round. Racism prevented investigation. A lot of things did him in. Incompetence, a certain goofiness, a poor debate performance. None of that helped, of course. But he couldn't escape the toxicity of identity. Walz's political career is over. He's not running for office again. Second hour of Varney just getting started.
And I want to say thank goodness. I'm so glad that liberal Tim Walz, Varney missed that. He should have, again, put down liberal, because that's what it's all about. Minnesota is a liberal state run by a liberal governor, and I am hopeful that with the removal of the liberal governor Tim Walz, that liberalism in Minnesota will soon give way as well. The other thing about Tim Walz, he's not popular. Nobody likes him. He's ugly. I mean, when you look at this guy, he looks like a Muppet. He has no lips. Every time he smiles or frowns, it looks like his face is caving in. So that's one of the reasons also that he is leaving office. I think maybe he finally went ahead and looked in the mirror and realized how ugly he truly was. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of motivation.
What do you do when no one believes in you? What do you do when the evidence all around you suggests you'll be stuck in this mess forever? What is it that can make you keep pushing forward?
When you're facing so many challenges, your inner conversation will be so loud, telling you that it's over. The dream is dead. The vision is gone. There's nothing left for you. When you hear that conversation rising in your mind, you've got to find that other voice, that real voice, that voice that says, there is still a way out of this. It is possible that I can get through this.
The vision is still intact. I have what it takes. I'm strong enough. I'm smart enough. I'm capable of great things. And great things are meant to happen to me.
I don't belong at the bottom, and I'm going to go all out to get out. I deserve the greatest. And all these challenges I'm facing right now, they won't stop me. They're nothing but temporary inconveniences.
You've got to speak to yourself positively day in and day out. People may think you're insane, but pay no attention to them. You block them out and you focus on yourself. Focusing all your energy and effort on things you're striving for. And as you convince yourself, telling yourself that you have everything it takes to win, that this is your time, this is your moment, and that you will not stop until you get what you rightfully should have, you will begin to see yourself doing better than ever before.
Take the leap of faith. Trust yourself and believe in yourself that everything is going to be all right.
Those people who can face rejection again and again and again, who can handle going through defeat again and again and again, and no matter what happens to them, they can keep coming back at it with a positive, uplifted attitude. These are the people who end up on top in life. They keep striving when everybody else is quitting.
And as you're continuing to fight, as you're pushing forward, as you're doing more than what is required or what anyone expects of you, you will begin to shock yourself of what you're capable of.
You can do more than you think you can. You can go further than you'd ever conceive is possible. You've got to build a bulletproof level of self-confidence that will never hold you back from reaching your full potential ever again. And of course, you'll have haters. People will try to kill your dreams. Anyone building something always does. But it's your job to shut them all up with your results. The best revenge in life is massive success.
I will not settle, even if I have to start over, even if it took longer than I expected, even if I had to make extra payments, even if I have to crawl on my hands and knees. I will not give up on my dream. I will not neutralize my tenacity. I will not give up on my integrity. I will fight every day of my life. If you knock me down, you're going to have to do it again tomorrow, because I'll get back up again. I will not go quietly away into the night. I can. I will. I must. I can get through this. I will get through this. I must get through this. No matter what happens to me, no matter how many times I land on my face, no matter the struggles that get thrown my way, I know without a shadow of a doubt, I can make it. Every setback becomes a stepping stone. Every fall, a lesson learned. Every bit of the pain is nothing more than opportunities to showcase my resilience. With unwavering faith in myself and an unyielding spirit, I will rise above the storms, reaching for the skies with a heart unburdened by doubt. At some point, your faith has got to be tested. At some point, you've got to be tested by life. And nobody's coming to save you. So you've got to save yourself. It's up to you to take responsibility for your life and realize that you are the determining factor of where you end up.
And that was a little bit of motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a little meditation. And that was a little bit of meditation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a quick paragraph from the American Thinker, The Usefulness of the Conspiracy Theory Charge. And this is the first paragraph. You may think climate alarmism is a great overhype, that the 2020 election is unusually significant, had unusually significant voting irregularities, or that Russiagate was a hoax perpetrated by the Clinton campaign and our national intelligence agencies. If so, according to the progressive left and its media, you're a right-wing perpetrator of conspiracy theory born of your emotionalism, credulity, and paranoia. Therefore, there's no need to refute your ideas with evidence and argument, as John Stuart Mill would deem the essence of our democratic project. Okay, so what he's missing here is that, and maybe you've noticed it, I've noticed it, is that the left media, and it's not only, well, Fox as well. Let's put it that way. Fox isn't exactly right-wing, but anyhow, that news people no longer do investigations, right? So if you're looking to, you have a theory, for instance, that Donald Trump is a Nazi. So what would you do if you're a news person? You go out and you investigate and see what the truth is. Is there evidence to support that charge or not? But the problem for the CNN left, the CNN liberals, is if they go out and do an investigation and they come up with evidence that shows that Donald Trump is closer to being Roosevelt than Hitler, you got a problem. You can't go back and get on your show and say to all of your viewers, all 6 or 12 of them, hey, guess what, I was wrong. It turns out that Donald Trump is a great guy. He's more like Roosevelt than Hitler. You can't do that. But if you lie about it, say, well, we did an investigation and our results show that he is Hitler and he is a dictator, et cetera, then you have some more problems. Because, number one, the risk of discovery. If people discover that you've actually flat out lied about this, then your credibility is shot. The second part of this is that a lie weighs heavily on one's conscience, on one's psyche. And if you're in the habit of lying all the time, it's not going to be very long before you're going to have to quit the business, because the pressure, the psychological pressure of trying to keep all those lies straight is going to be enormous. So what do? Then you come up with a great idea. I know an arbitrary claim. I go out and I accuse Donald Trump of being a Hitler, of being a Nazi and a dictator, etc., and I don't bother to investigate. What I'm doing is simply asking people to take my word for it. And if they take my word for it, so much the better, and if they don't, oh well. Right? So, that's what's happening here with conspiracy theories and all their emotional credulity and paranoia and etc. They're not making those claims because they can back them up, because they've done an investigation, because they know for a fact that you're emotionalist, credulous, and paranoid. They make the allegations arbitrarily. The best way to deal with it is to identify it and say to somebody, you go to work and you're dealing with Sammy Socialist and he starts giving you the left-wing business, you can just say, well, that's all arbitrary claims. You have no proof, no evidence, nothing. Have a nice day, and walk away. So again, the left, look for that. When you're watching the news, how many of the news stories are actually investigated? Very, 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 very few are investigated. The vast majority of these stories, they simply go to the White House, for instance, ask for a reaction or a statement. The White House gives them the statement, and that's as far as it goes. Again, so that they can get away with something, so they can get away with making arbitrary claims, but making those arbitrary claims seem like they're news. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a couple of paragraphs of an article from the Real Clear Politics, and actually I think was originally put in, Bloomberg, then Yahoo Finance. But anyways, let's see if there's a... Patricia Garrett is the one that wrote this for Bloomberg, and it's about Nicolas Maduro and his number two, Delcy Rodriguez. As the U.S. threatened Nicolas Maduro's grip on power in recent months, a cadre of executives, lawyers, and investors tied to the oil industry made their case to anyone who would listen. The Trump administration, congressional aides. His familiar number two, Delcy Rodriguez, should fill his shoes in Venezuela. An oil minister herself, Rodriguez has long been the go-to contact for senior executives whom she impressed by navigating Venezuela's industry through international sanctions, economic pressures, and internal mismanagement. Her loyalty to the Maduro regime notwithstanding, she be best positioned to shepherd through the U.S. plan to restore Venezuela to its glory days as an oil gusher, argued executives and lobbyists. Okay, so when I'm reading this, my first thought is, what's the point? It seems rather pointless. And then that's when it dawned on me that what the author is doing here is simply making a series of arbitrary claims, that the author has not actually bothered to do an investigation of any sort, that all the information that she is presenting in this article are the results of bios and press releases. And that's it. Now, why would the author do this? Simple. You make arbitrary claims in order to further a narrative or a particular agenda. If you do an investigation, your investigation might have or show facts that contradict your narrative. Then you're stuck. Once you've drawn the conclusion, you're stuck with it. Normally, that's a good thing, but for liberals like this author, it's not. They want to be able to change their narrative, either a little or a lot, and do it on the fly without having to apologize and without having to have damage to their credibility. So they're making arbitrary claims, asking people to simply take their word for it. And if the majority of people do take their word for it, so much the better. If not, oh well, we'll try again the next time. So anytime that you're reading an article and you get this, what's the point type of a feeling from it, consider the fact that the author of that particular article has done no investigation, has garnered no facts, and is simply presenting an arbitrary claim. Back in a minute. Thank you. And a clip of Alice Weidel announcing that if elected within 100 days, she will completely close Germany's borders.
Wir haben die Antworten. Wir haben einen Plan. Wir haben einen Zukunftsplan für Deutschland, den wir in den ersten 100 Tagen einer Regierungsbeteiligung angehen. Die Grenzen lückenlos schließen und jeden illegal und ohne Papiere Einreisenden zurückweisen und eine ganz klare Ansage an alle Welt: Die deutschen Grenzen sind dicht, liebe Freunde. Sie sind dicht. Die Versorgung von Asylbewerbern von Geld auf Sachleistungen umstellen. Sozialleistungen für Nicht-Aufenthaltsberechtigte streichen und Rückführung im großen Stil durchführen. Und ich muss Ihnen ganz ehrlich sagen, wenn es dann Remigration heißen soll, dann heißt es eben Remigration. Das Asylrecht muss endlich eingehalten werden. Asyl ist Aufenthalt auf Zeit und endet, wenn der Fluchtgrund entfällt. Versorgung von Flüchtlingen vor Ort, damit sie erst gar nicht nach Deutschland kommen. Turbo-Einbürgerung und die Verramschung des deutschen Passes, so wie es die CDU betreibt, sofort beenden. Das ist mit uns nicht zu machen. Und nach dem Vorbild der Niederlande und von Ungarn Ausstieg aus dem EU-Asylsystem. Ganz einfach. Deutschland wird unter unserer Führung aus dem EU-Asylsystem austreten. Darauf können Sie sich verlassen.
And that was conservative Alice Weidel. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Apollo.
Chapter 28. You don't have time to worry. Glenn Lunny had been in the control center even before the explosion, reading the flight log in the Mocher and poking around the back rooms, as was his custom before taking a shift. 14 minutes into the crisis, when Lovell reported that something was venting, Kranz told his assistant flight director to get hold of Lunny and let him know what was going on. From then until the time he took over, Lunny watched from a seat beside Kranz, just as the rest of the black team's controllers watched from chairs pulled up next to their counterparts. Sort of a dawning was going on, Lunny said, as Gene worked the problem with the guys and I sat there and listened to it. It wasn't a thing where immediately you knew, boy, we've blown the tanks and we got to get this thing back from the moon and power up the LEM. The control center reacted cautiously, Lunny said, and properly so. You don't want to jump off the deep end. 1. When Lunny took the console at 69 minutes after the explosion, he was determined to keep the CSM alive. Odyssey was partially powered down, but all its crucial life support systems were still operating off the one remaining fuel cell. If one of the oxygen tanks and one of the fuel cells could be kept online, they could sustain that configuration all the way back to Earth. For the first minutes of his shift, Lunny concentrated on that possibility. Repeatedly, he pushed Clint Burton, the black team's ECOM, to come up with new ways of dealing with the failing fuel cells and the dropping oxygen pressure. First of all, was Burton sure that the dropping pressure in O2 Tank 2 was legitimate? Yes, Burton was. What confirming information did he have? The temperature was rising, as it would if the pressure was falling. Lunny was persistent because the next step they were contemplating was shutting off the reactant valve in Fuel Cell 1, as they had done already in Fuel Cell 3. If they shut it off and then came up with an Aaron-like solution that suddenly got the O2 pressures back up, the door would still be closed on 2/3 of the CSM's power supply. It was like shooting a lame horse if you were stranded in the middle of a desert. It might be the smart thing to do, but it was awfully final. Lunny, like Kranz before him, had no way of knowing that the explosion had instantaneously closed the reactant valves on both Fuel Cell 1 and Fuel Cell 3. At 10 minutes into his shift, 79 minutes after the explosion, Lunny was close to exhausting the alternatives. "You're ready for that now?" "Sure, absolutely, ECOM," Lunny asked. "That's it, flight." The oxygen pressure is still going down, and it's not possible that the thing is sort of bottoming out, is it? Well, the rate is slower, but we have less pressure too, so we would expect it to be a little bit slower. You are sure then you want to close it? Seems to me we have no choice, flight. Well? Burton, under this onslaught, polled his backroom one last time. They all agreed. "We're go on that, flight." "Okay, that's your best judgment. We think we ought to close that off, huh?" "That's affirmative." Lunny finally acquiesced. "Okay, Fuel Cell 1 reactants coming off." It was uncharacteristic behavior by Lunny, stalling, he would later call it, just to be sure, because it was clear that we were at the ragged edge of being able to get this thing back. That whole night I had a sense of containing events as best we could so as not to make a serious mistake and let it get worse. Throughout the long evening, Swiggert's voice never sounded so despondent as it did a minute later when he reported from Odyssey, "Fuel Cell 1 is closed." Though he continued to seek a way to hold on to the CSM, Lunny was now thinking about the LEM Aquarius with its independent guidance, control, and environmental systems. He called Telmu on the loop. "Telmu, flight. Go, flight. Is there anything simple that we can refer the crew to get them thinking about using the LEM here?" Lunny asked. "Or have you got anything in the checklist paperwork to describe to them what your intentions are?" "Negative," Telmu replied. "There is nothing documented in the crew's contingency procedures. We're thinking about using the LEM as a lifeboat, We have some procedures here on the ground, though. I'm sure you do, said Lunny. What do they amount to? Flying with a tunnel open? Raj, just a LEM low-power load supplying power to the CSM. At this point, the Mokers thinking about the lifeboat procedure was still collectively confused. Theoretically, there were two ways to do it. Either the crew could power up the LEM and live in it, or the LEM's batteries could be used to keep the CSM's systems going. Instinctively, Telmu and some others in the Moker had thought first that evening about using Aquarius to power Odyssey. When Lunny asked, Telmu was still off on that tangent. But using Aquarius for that purpose wasn't really feasible. The CSM was set up to supply power to the LEM, not the other way around. The MER would soon figure out how to reverse the process, but there was no off-the-shelf procedure. Furthermore, Odyssey's systems were power-hungry. Aquarius's batteries couldn't possibly feed them for long enough. Lunny had not thought through all of this in detail, but he was suspicious. Supplying power to the CSM, he asked Telmu dubiously. Yes, said Telmu, about 5 amps. To what? Asked Lunny, meaning, what did they think they were going to hook up with? What subsystems in the CSM would the power be used for? Lunny asked ECOM to get to work on answers. As for himself, Lunny began thinking about shutting down Odyssey altogether and sending the crew to live in the LEM. Lunny had come on shift with a schedule at the back of his mind. While watching Kranz and listening to the loops, he had heard Liebergott report that they had 1 hour and 54 minutes of oxygen pressure left. That had been less than 20 minutes before Lunny took over the flight director's console. Thus, Lunny should have been able to figure on squeezing at least 1.5 hours of power out of O2 Tank 1 and Fuel Cell 2 after he came on shift. But it was a night during which the flight director was destined to get only bad news. 18 minutes into his shift, ECOM informed him that he had 40 minutes before the pressure in Tank 1 hit 100 psi, functionally 0. The pressure was dropping faster than before. Lunny tried one last time to save the CSM. Clint, let me ask you, is there anything you want to do trying to pump up the other tank? Or are you satisfied that both of these tanks are going down and we're past helping them even with batteries? That's what I'm getting at. I'm just trying to be sure that you've gone through everything and you don't have any other tricks up your sleeve. Sure don't, Flight, Burton said. Since the initial report of a problem, as first Kranz and then Lunny had been forced into a steadily shrinking circle of options, the flight control team had kept searching for something that would enable them to avoid the last drastic step of giving up on the command module and using the LEM systems. Now Lunny had exhausted the alternatives, and he turned his full attention to getting Aquarius ready to serve as a lifeboat. By this time, the notion of using the LEM to power the CSM had been discarded. The plan was to have the crew live in Aquarius until just before entry, when they would move back into the CSM and power up with the CSM's 3 internal batteries that were its source of power for the last phase of the flight. Lunny was embarking on an exceedingly tricky project that neither he nor any of his team had ever practiced, to close down a command module in such a way that it could be brought back to life some days later and, at the same time, power up a lunar module without any help from the command module. And this novel, complex procedure, filled with possibilities for irretrievable error, was to be accomplished, or so Lunny now thought, with fewer than 40 minutes of power remaining from Fuel Cell 2. When Capcom Jack Lousma had told the crew a few minutes earlier that the ground was starting to think about using the LEM as a lifeboat, the crew was glad to hear it. That's something we're thinking about too, Lovell said. They'd already been talking it over, and the first thing the crew proposed to do was run a quick P-52, program number 52, and get the LEM's platform aligned. It was an important decision. If the crew was to get home, they had to have an aligned, functioning guidance platform. But an IMU was also an extravagant consumer of electrical power and water for cooling purposes, both of which were now in precariously short supply. Odyssey and Aquarius each had platforms that were not in any way linked with each other. The 13 crew was proposing to power up Aquarius's IMU, run a P-52 on Odyssey's computer to give them the CSM's alignment data, and then punch those numbers into Aquarius's system. The question was, should they do it? The next time that Aquarius would have to have the platform operating could be as long as 20 hours away when, after they came out from behind the moon, the LEM's descent engine would establish a trajectory for home. Furthermore, the platform could be aligned from scratch through star sightings taken by the crew. The Apollo 13 crew had been trained in that procedure, and the Apollo 12 crew had demonstrated that it could be done in a real emergency. Therefore, one option was to leave the platform powered down until a few hours before it had to be used. Lunny and Control and Guido discussed it over the loops and agreed that they ought to power down Odyssey's IMU and align Aquarius's IMU later using the alignment optical telescope. Lunny told Odyssey to hold off on the P-52. Tom Stafford, who had commanded Apollo 10 a year earlier, was in the Mocher listening to this exchange. As soon as it was over, he approached Lunny for a private conversation. They were on the wrong track, Stafford said. Maneuvering the docked spacecraft with the LEMS thrusters to get manual star sightings was going to be next to impossible. It was essential they get an alignment now from the CSM while it still had power. Stafford's was the knowledge of a man who had flown the LEM, and Lunny respected it. Clint Burton had more bad news. Flight ECOM. Go ahead. Okay, got an update on the time, said Burton. It looks like we got about 18 minutes until we get down to 100 psi, and that's the cutoff point. It had been 4 minutes since ECOM had told Flight that they had 40 minutes left. What had been a scramble now became a breakneck sprint. After listening to Stafford, Lunny went back to his controllers and asked that they look at the trade-off. Could they stand the power drain if they turned on the LEMS platform now? They would work on it, they replied. Stand by one, Flight. All right, Lunny muttered. Then emphatically, pronto. The exchanges over Flight's loop were now continuous bursts of queries and instructions to the flight controllers around the room, marked every few minutes by another update on the time remaining before the command module went dead. Like a variety show juggler with a dozen plates spinning on the top of sticks, Lunny went from one decision to another, keeping the plate spinning, sometimes getting back to the one at the other end of the row only when it seemed to be wobbling on its last revolution. Throughout it all, Lunny, age 33, maintained the mildly distracted air of an experienced parent getting many small children ready for school. At one of the most hectic points, Lunny even took a few seconds to make a small ironic joke that no one else got. Telmu had forgotten about using the LEM to power the CSM, and now 10 minutes later was focusing exclusively on powering up the LEM's own systems. Lunny asked Telmu whether they needed to send any power at all from the LEM to the CSM, if just to keep the IMU heated. I'm not sure we can do that, Telmu told Flight, as if surprised Flight could even consider such a thing. Can't do that, Lunny acknowledged, amusement in his voice. That was a long time ago. It seemed to the astronauts that the ground was taking an awfully long time to recognize what was obvious to them, that they had to get into the LEM immediately. But they couldn't simply climb in and shut the door. Powering up the LEM was much more complicated than throwing a power switch, and activating the LEM's many systems was much more complicated than flicking a few switches to on. Fred Hayes had 3 onboard checklists for powering up Aquarius and activating its systems under various circumstances, none of which applied to the circumstances he faced now. Furthermore, the shortest of the established checklists would take 2 hours to complete. Telmu's team had been busy cobbling together a way of powering up Aquarius without any cooperation from Odyssey, and devising a drastically shortened checklist for doing it. Finally, Capcom Lausma was able to tell the crew that he had a procedure for powering up. Okay, said Swigert, that sounds like good news. He did not need to add, it's just in time. Everyone knew that already. Lunny was having trouble getting things to happen. He had been persuaded that the crew had to run a P-52 in the command module to get a course alignment for the LEMS platform, and Guido and Control now agreed. But Guido was struggling simultaneously with a completely separate issue that had come to preoccupy him. His back room was posing the hair-raising possibility that if they turned off the command module's guidance system and let it sit in the cold, surely sub-freezing. How much colder than that, no one could predict exactly. It wouldn't work when the time came for entry. The guidance people, along with teams in the MUR and at MIT and Cambridge, were trying to calculate whether that fear was warranted, and if so, whether they could afford to run the IMU's heaters for the duration of the flight. 3 times, Lunny had tried to focus Guido's attention on the status of the alignment presently residing in Odyssey's computer. Now Guido came onto the loop saying that the crew ought to do a P-52. That's what I'm asking you, said Lunny exasperatedly. Do you have a good alignment now? We don't have much time. Do you have a good one now, as far as you know? A good alignment? Guido asked, still absorbed in deciding whether they should keep the IMU in the command module heated. Yeah, that's what I'm asking you, said Lunny. You have a good alignment? I'm not worried about tenths of a degree either. Well, it ought to be that good, Flight, said Guido, aggrieved. Ordinarily, it should be good within hundredths of a degree. Okay, yeah, said Lunny wearily. Just then, ECOM came back to him. We need to open up the surge tank, Burton said. That manifold pressure is dropping. No longer was Burton's backroom worried about having enough oxygen for power, but about whether the crew would have enough oxygen in the command module to breathe. Lunny grunted softly, as if someone had just hit him in the stomach, which is how he described that moment years later. It was like a blow, and then like a hole into which his stomach and the rest of him were starting to slide. It was the one time during the entire night, he recalled, when, for a moment, he backed away from the rush of events and had a sense of, holy Christ, it's this bad. It has really happened this way. The surge tank was the last reserve of oxygen. It had to be protected for the entry, and now Burton wanted him to use part of it, lest the crew asphyxiate. Okay, Lunny replied after a pause. Wouldn't you rather pump that up in the LEM? He didn't want to tap the CSM's surge tank. Well, said Burton, we got to get into the LEM first, Flight. Capcom, get him going in the LEM, Lunny said quickly. We got to get oxygen on in the LEM. Lausma passed the word on to the crew and turned to Lunny. Years later, Lausma himself would not remember, but Lunny felt that the Capcom, bless his stout marine heart, had recognized his sinking feeling. Off the loop, Lausma reminded Lunny to see how far Telmu had gotten in preparing his abbreviated activation checklist. Maybe they could use that rather than ad hoc the steps. That one comment at that one point got me right back out of the hole and on track, Lunny recalled. After that, you're busy. It's just blowing and going time, and you don't have time to worry. The power from the remaining fuel cell in Odyssey was now good only minute to minute. Since the LEM still wasn't prepared to take over, it was agreed between the ground and Swigert that he should switch to one of the CSM's internal batteries just before the fuel cell failed. While they didn't want to do this a moment sooner than necessary, they couldn't afford to delay it a moment too long lest they lose all power temporarily, and with it control of the spacecraft and the course alignment stored in the IMU. The 20 minutes that followed were perhaps the most rushed, the most confused, and in retrospect the most glorious of the 4-day crisis. The black team was racing to complete in minutes a procedure that usually took hours, under the threat of imminent disaster if they failed, and under the more subtle threat of a delayed disaster if they got the LEM started but did not shut down the CSM properly. In the controllers' memories, the years have tended to smooth over the rough spots. Many of the controllers recall it as having been a piece of cake. Lunny himself conceded that it was an exciting time, something of a blur in his memory, but orderly. I look back on it and reflect upon the kind of teamwork and lack of panic, he said. There was no sense of, my God, the sky is falling. Probably each individual had the same few seconds I did, but there was no sense of it in the control center. Listen to the tapes and it all sounds tickety-boo, like the guys have been training for it all their lives. In reality, the tapes reveal that Lunny's memory was 2/3 right. Teamwork, yes. Lack of panic, yes. Tickety-boo, no. The Mooker was jammed with people by this time. It wasn't like the big moments in other flights when the off-shift controllers would come in and watch quietly. Now each console was surrounded by a knot of men trying to put together new procedures, amend old ones, and interpret the data, talking to back rooms that were also crowded with reinforcements. It was so noisy that Lunny had to take time out to ask for quiet. The attention of the people talking on the loops was unusually fragmented, and the result was occasionally missed signals, confusion, and contradiction. ECOM's backroom had been wrong about needing the surge tank. Burton came on a minute after he had asked for it to tell Flight to disregard the surge tank request. Lunny had time only to acknowledge, all right, because he was struggling to get the LEM activated. A few minutes later, Burton was back with a request to get the crew to stuff the power down. Okay, said Lunny cautiously, but we want to keep Odyssey's IMU up for a little while. I thought you just said with Bat A to get a course align in the LEM. Burton realized his mistake. When he said stuff the power down, he hadn't meant to include the IMU. Well, he said apologetically, maybe there's a bit of confusion here. Yeah, you don't want to turn IMU off until we get a course line in the LEM, right? That's a firm flight. The guidance experts remained absorbed in trying to analyze whether they could turn off the heaters in the IMU. Lunny, worried about the power drain, checked in with GNC. GNC, I haven't heard from you on the heaters yet on the IMU. Raj flight, GNC replied. Preliminary look at it looks like we could pull those circuit breakers, power down the heaters. We're still trying to get a handle on it. Thinking how much of the command module's battery power had to be saved for the entry phase, Lunny observed, we may well have no choice. That's a fact, GNC conceded. Lunny was struck by a thought. How many amps do they take, he asked. 10. In their current situation, this was an enormous amount of power, and to be of any use, it would have to be maintained throughout the rest of the flight. Ah, Lunny exclaimed. 10 amps? Raj, the reply came back, sheepishly, as GNC suddenly realized that his team had been missing the point. I'm looking at, Lunny did a quick mental calculation, 50, 60, 80 hours. Another nervous Raj. That's academic. A hurried, I understand. A few minutes later, GNC came back with a correction. If they heated the IMU but turned off the gyros and the rest of the apparatus, they would need only 0.8 amp, and they recommended leaving the heater up. Lunny pointed out briskly that 0.8 amp still worked out to 64 amp hours. I can't afford that. They would assume that the IMU could survive without a heater. We only almost lost it once, Lunny said. It occurred during the final stages of the move from Odyssey to Aquarius, when two separate processes were going on simultaneously. In Aquarius, Lovell and Hayes were moving through their improvised activation checklist, bringing the LEM systems online. For the past 10 minutes, they had been preoccupied with getting a good course alignment, which they had done in record time. Jack Swigert was still in Odyssey, powering down the systems one by one. The LEM now had a computer that was up and running, and a good set of angles punched into the guidance system. In their relief, the reaction of the men in the Mocher was to assume that now the LEM was operational, and that Odyssey could safely render itself helpless. The problem was that the activation routines were being relayed up to the two spacecraft in chunks. Among these chunks was the one that included the steps necessary for pressurizing the reaction and control system, RCS, in Aquarius, and powering up the balls, short for 8 balls, referring to the displays that let Lovell and Hayes know the spacecraft's attitude. But the actual rate at which the crew in Aquarius was accomplishing these steps, and the actual order in which they were being performed, were in doubt. Reflecting on it afterward, Lunny said that at that point he should have stopped and established a clear-cut understanding of the obvious. Whatever else you do, don't power down the command module's platform and its RCS until the LEM's control systems are up. But he didn't, and the two procedures got out of sync with the rest. Odyssey's platform and RCS were powered down. Aquarius's RCS and 8 balls were not yet ready to take over. As they listened to the traffic, the mix-up slowly became apparent. Okay, we haven't gotten ourselves in a position here where, we have no attitude control in either vehicle, have we? Said Lausma uncertainly. Lunny sounded almost abashed. I'm waiting to see when we get attitude control in the LEM. Would you ask them to call us when they have attitude control in the LEM, and then we'll power the inverters, etc. down in the CSM? Lausma asked Aquarius to inform him when they had attitude control. Hayes replied that they were still working on the pressurization of the RCS system, which meant they still didn't. A-Flight, Lausma said plaintively, they don't have attitude control in the... And we don't have it in the CMS, Lausma was a little flustered himself. Well, they're trying to get it up, right? Lunny said. Yeah, they are, replied Lausma, but he was openly unhappy. The spacecraft did not go to gimbal lock while it drifted. The gap in control was only about 2.5 minutes long, nor would it have been catastrophic if it had, Lunny reflected. They would have put the crew to sleep, worked up some procedures, and done a manual course alignment when the crew was rested. Nonetheless, Lunny was always irritated with himself for having allowed it to happen. It turned out to be not a real problem, but I was really pissed at myself because it was kind of the only mistake we made that night. At 9 minutes before midnight, Jack Swigert closed down Fuel Cell 2, completing the shutdown of Odyssey. The LEM was now fully operational, with an alignment stored in its guidance system. It had been 2 hours and 43 minutes since Swigert had first reported a problem, about an hour and 20 minutes since the Mocher had first realized the crew would have to use the LEM. Right after Apollo 13, John Aaron recalled, FOD prepared special checklists for activating the LEM as a lifeboat. And during the sims for every mission that followed, the flight control team was thrown at least one massive 13-type failure on a translunar coast. But no matter how good the new checklists were, and no matter how much they practiced, Aaron said, we never did it that quick again. Swigert drifted through the docking tunnel into Aquarius. This was alien territory for Swigert, who, as a command module pilot, had never spent any training time in the LEM simulator. He looked down at Lovell and Hayes from the hatch. It's up to you now, he said.
And that was Chapter 28 of Apollo, Chapter 28 and 28, Section 1. And next week, more from Apollo 13. And this was Apollo by Charles Murray and Catherine Bly Cox. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you're not neutral and that the government has no rights.